the midsummer of 1675, the southeastern portion of New England had suffered an uprising, a conflagration, as the Sakonnet, Pocasset, and Pokanoket have risen against their neighboring communities and taken up the hatchet for retribution against slights that they felt went back to the early moments of the connection between they and the English colonists. In this video, in our King Philip's War series, we're going to investigate August 1675, when the war will spread from southeastern Massachusetts to the land of the Nipmucs, and neighboring tribes will attack and in many cases destroy their sister settlements of the English. This is a most doleful time to those English colonists, and it's a time when the English are going to learn some serious lessons in warfare in the New World. So join me, King Philip's War, August 1675. So while Philip moves through Nipsachuck Swamp out east, trying to extricate his Pokanoket, Pocasset, and Sakonnet people from the clutches of the United Colonies, Massachusetts Bay is worried about the Nipmuc, and they've sent Hutchinson, Captain Edward Hutchinson, out here to find out the disposition of the Nipmuc and their great chief Metacom. Hutchinson, along with Captain Wheeler, are in command of a mounted force of 20 men, most of these men from the northeastern part of Mass Bay. And they're not familiar with the hardwood swamps of this region. And believe me, this region is crisscrossed with beaver swamps and slow-moving streams constantly dammed by beaver. Luckily, Hutchinson and Wheeler are guided by Ephraim Curtis, who knows his stuff and has visited the Nipmuc multiple times. Curtis was a fur trader, a trapper, a hunter, an explorer, and had made quite an impression on the Nipmuc, who considered him a neighbor, which might explain why he gets quite lucky in this story. Now, he knows that finding the Nipmuc is going to be no piece of cake, because they're spread out over about 100 square miles of swamp and meandering stream. He barely starts his journey when he finds out that his own home at Quinsigamond, in what's now Worcester, has been looted by an apparent Nipmuc warband. But he perseveres, and with the help of native Indian guides, he'll find the council fire of the Nipmuc. He had to find their war villages, and he knew of several, but there were several others. And hummocks like the one in front of me could support dozens of wigwams and a stockade around it, surrounded by a natural fortification of swamp. And it was near here, and maybe here itself, because it's really hard to pin down Curtis's movements, that he first made contact with the Nipmuc, who seemed pretty irate and didn't want to talk to him. But finally he was able to cross the stream and visit their tribal council fire, where he has a tense meeting with a group of people that ultimately tell him they are not on the warpath. And he's been out here before. He was out here just a couple weeks earlier. And their entire attitude apparently has changed, although they say they're peaceful. And Curtis believes them, with the sachem of the Quaboags, Metacom, having sold land to the Quaboag plantation. Matunis and Sagamore Sam both appearing to be in good spirits. He had no reason to doubt them. But upon arriving back in Boston, where news of the attack on Mass Bay's settlement at Mendon has arrived, the good Puritan fathers in Boston decide it's time to leave it to the experts, and they're going to send Captain Edward Hutchinson, who's already negotiated successfully with the Narragansetts, out to the Nipmucs with Curtis as the guide. Curtis will end up back at the Quaboag plantation on August 1st as guide to a mounted force commanded by Thomas Wheeler, escorting Edward Hutchinson, who had provided the Mass Bay colony with valuable information about the Narragansetts. He'd been sent as an emissary there to ascertain their disposition, and had come away with promises that they would remain neutral, but they would not give up any Wampanoag that had strayed into their lands. That was one of the demands, especially from the Plymouth colony. Curtis will end up in Brookfield guiding this mounted expedition. And they'll stay the night in the Ayers Garrison while Curtis moves up the road toward a set of villages on the Ware River today called Metacom, where he will find out what's going on with the Nipmuc, because they've moved maybe 12 miles from Bremfield up to 3 native villages on islands in the Ware River. And Curtis will go to ask if they would care to meet with Hutchinson. And Metacom, commanding their forces along with Sagamore Sam and Matunis, will agree to meet with Hutchinson at a meadow maybe 3 miles, 2.5 miles away from the site that we're at today. On the morning of August 2nd, 1675, Edward Hutchinson, with Thomas Wheeler's trained band of 20 mounted men, along with Sergeant Ayers of the Quaboag plantation and the scout Ephraim Curtis, arrived at this field in anticipation of meeting a delegation of Nipmuc. The field was empty, and with no native people here, the men engaged in council. Should they go to Metacom, it was a risk. They'd be traveling cross-country on native paths. They'd be traveling in the face of a war that had broken out to the east. Had the Nipmuc joined King Philip was the question. The fate of the small community of Quaboag Plantation on the other side of those trees, maybe 2 miles, 2.5 miles away, rested on their decision. 350 years ago is a long time. This monument was placed about 120 years ago by the local historical society in conjunction with the state. And notice how they phrase the monument's location. Somewhere within a half a mile along the base of this hill, Captain Edward Hutchinson and his company were attacked by Indians lying in ambush August 2nd, 1675, and he and more than one half of his men slain or wounded. A most sanguine event, as they say. The site of Wheeler's Surprise, as it is called, is still really unknown. According to the story, he and his men are marching down a native path, which becomes extremely compromised. It goes between a steep, rocky hill and a almost impenetrable swamp. Despite Curtis's warnings and misgivings, they wanted to hasten forward to the site where Curtis had met them the day before. Maybe they didn't believe Curtis. Maybe they think that this young frontiersman is spinning a yarn at them. But they want to go to this mythical place called Metacom, where the collected tribes of the Nipmuc had gathered. And they moved along, mounted, around 30 mounted warriors, 3 of the residents of Quaboag Plantation, 3 native Indian guides, Curtis and another gentleman from Sudbury named Shadrach Hapgood. And they moved along until they came to a place where Curtis, with his experience in the world of the native people and in the wilderness of central Massachusetts, said, we should turn and we should go back. There's no point. They said they were going to meet us. They haven't met us. Well, this isn't where we want to go. Now, these are mounted men, and they've been riding down one of the myriad of native pathways that travel from pond to pond, river to river, beaver flow to beaver flow. They come to a place where the path narrows with a dense, swampy meadow on one side, and on the other, a steep, rocky hill. And it was covered with brush and regrowing trees and vegetation. Curtis basically says, no, this is not where we want to go. But Hutchinson says, we must press on, sir. So as they moved along, the path became narrow. And generally, New England forests at this time were open, but this became thicker and thicker. The trail that they were on had become little more than a deer run. And Curtis was up front with the natives and the citizens of Quaboag guiding, when all of a sudden what you got to figure is going to happen. Out of the marsh grass on the left, from the rocky slope above them, puffs of smoke, a veritable explosion of gunfire. Several of the mounted warriors will fall off their horses immediately, including Hutchinson, who shot through the throat. Wheeler, the leader of the expedition, militarily is shot in the arm. Luckily, Curtis is unscathed along with two of the natives, but the other native falls dead in the path. Howling war bands are on all sides of this ill-fated party. One thing that Metacom was always good at was choosing his ground all through the war, and he had chose wisely. The rocky slope above Curtis would make it very difficult for the mounted forces to break out, and yet, in fear of their lives, their minds were concentrated, and up the hill they went, breaking through the band of surprised Nipmuc. Now, if you know military strategy, when you walk into an ambush, right, the ambusher is trying to get you to walk into the throat of the ambush, where my thumb meets my hand. That's where they want to spring the ambush, and Metacom had done that. Curtis and the native warriors, the Brookfield, Quaboag settlers had ridden right into the throat. That's when the ambush is sprung and the jaws close. When Curtis and the native people tried riding backwards, they were met by increasing gunfire, and they did the only thing they could do. If you go to ground in an ambush situation, you die. So what Curtis and his native warriors did was break the ambush by attacking a flank, by going through the flank, up the hill, and heading back toward Quaboag Plantation and the Ayers Garrison as quickly as they could, leaving Sergeant Ayers, the owner of the garrison, dead on the field, along with a childhood friend of Ephraim Curtis, Shadrach Hapgood. This is Wheeler's Surprise, an awful and bloody moment early in King Philip's War, and it will lead to one of the great sieges of early American history. So let's get to that. So a morning that had started out so favorably for the English turns into calamity and chaos after the Nipmuc attack, with the little band scurrying, guided by Curtis and the native guides, back toward Brookfield, closely pursued by Metacom. In our next installment, we will find out what happens to Ephraim Curtis, Thomas Wheeler, and the little band that made their way back to Quaboag Plantation, about to suffer a terrible siege. Like, subscribe, and don't be afraid to share.